just a minute here. This is Damian Macy from the Friends of the Marshall Public Library. And as part of our oral history project, I have with us today Evan Lycan from just outside of Marshall. And we're going to hear from him about his story and the area that he lives in. With that.
Okay, thank you, Damien. Where was I born? I was born in Dawson Township, 1941, May the 18th of 1941.
Very far back.
And my parents was Lawrence and Audrey Lycan. And I have one sister, Mary Beth, which was 12 and a half years younger than I am. It's just the two of us. I was almost like a single child, you know. Is that loud enough where you can hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So we lived there. I think I was born in my grandmother's house in the same place I live right now, a different home. But I was born there, and they moved into where they purchased 73 acres, where my daughter lives right now. So they lived there, and we lived in an old home that was built around 1850. And because I know my dad and mother built a new home in 1949.
Was that structure built out of logs?
No. It was an old, though, and it had been used for a post office or a postal drop-off for during the Civil War area. I know that I've heard the story that some people that live just south in the little lane there now come up there, and that's where they found out that their son had been killed in the Civil War. Their name was Miller. Dad and Mom bought that 73 acres, I think, about 1940. I don't think they moved there. I'm not sure exactly when they did move there, but I was born over at my grandparents' home, and then we moved back over there when I was 1 or so, I think. But Dad was born east of Clarksville with James Lycan was his father. And then my mother was born where I live now,
Wow.
except in a different home. So it asked if I was a native to come to Marshall. Well, we've been there. The Lycans have been around since time began almost. My great-great-great-grandfather, John Lycan, moved into what is now Edgar County in the 1820s.
Wow.
And he had a blacksmith shop in North Arm, which is east of Paris. And then when Paris was laid out, he had a blacksmith shop on the north side of the square in Paris. And then the history book says, the Edgar County history says that he ran a blacksmith shop there in Paris until somewhere in the late 20s or 30s, or early 30s. And he moved to Marshall, or Clark County rather, somewhere around, I think, where, on Big Creek. And he bought a mill there, had a mill there. And some of his children had already settled in Clark County. And I still have part of my grandfather Lycan's farm, and that was a part of the Lycan farm that had been in the family for a long time, 1800 sometime.
Is it called a Centennial Farm?
No, we don't have that on it, but it could be.
Could be.
Yeah. So the family, we went to church at Clarksville Baptist Church, and we've been through the many years there. My grandfather, both of my grandfathers, I think, had been deacons there. And my great-grandfather, one of them, had been the church clerk there, Bruce Clapp. I think my grandfather Lycan was on the building committee when they built the brick church that was there, that's gone now, the old brick church. I was on the building committee when we built the new church, and it was interesting, and it was, you know, it felt good to be able to do that.
With having been family and involved in the building of the old original church and living there and going to church, was that kind of a sentimental difficulty to see it go?
Yes, it was. But we moved into the new church, and after a few years, the old church began to look kind of down, you know. So we decided that it'd be better to get rid of it and have the room there. So, what was my neighborhood like back in the 40s? I started the school at a one-room school called East Liberty. Mm-hmm. It was just north of where I live now. And it was a one-room school. And Elsie Jane Mars was the teacher.
Oh, yeah.
And the first and second grades I had there. And then they consolidated after my first grade. Carl Claypool and I was the only two in first grade. Second grade, we had about 11 kids because kids were brought in from Green Moss, Mozart, and Pikes Peak, and at least those I know of, which included the Hollingsworths and Cutrights and the Burns and several other families there.
You mentioned Elsie Jane Mars. She taught with my mother at the new North Center School there for a number of years.
Yeah. She taught several places.
You remember anything about your, say, your daily routine in the one-room school?
We would have, each class would have a recitation, and we'd, you know, go up to the front and do things, because the first and second grade was the only grades I had in a one-room school. The fourth through sixth, third through sixth, was in Clarksville School, which is two-room. And so we had, when I was at Clarksville, we had first, second, third, and then fourth, fifth, sixth in the other room. But the fourth, fifth, sixth grades was a little different. We kind of sit in our own seats, you know, when we had recitation in those grades, but we did it one grade at a time, you know, and they'd come back to you, and each grade would have their own little thing with the teacher, and then go from there.
My wife started out in the one-room school too, and she said she thought it helped by you were hearing the advanced grades and what they're, and you learned really something from them too.
You did. But well, the first 2 years, the second grade I had, we just had first, second, and third grade in that one-room school that year. And then that school was closed then after that. So we went to Clarksville, and it was open for a few years after that then, until everyone went to the city elementary schools. So,
did you find that to be a dramatic change?
When I went to junior high, it was a dramatic change for me. I was a little country boy, and it was different, and I was scared, you know, and I've always been a little timid anyway. But it was a new thing, and kind of a shock, but we got through it. About our neighbors out there, you know, there was neighbors every quarter or half a mile, you know. Now you can go a few miles and no one in the no fence rows anymore, except where there's streams and things. No woods except where the streams are. But the school experience, we went ahead and I graduated Marshall High School in 1959, and I went on to SIU in agriculture. And after I graduated, each summer I worked as a student trainee with the USDA Soil Conservation Service. And after graduation, I had a job with the Soil Conservation. They put me in Metropolis, Massac County, for about a year, and then they moved me on to Jackson County for about a year. And then after that, they transferred me to Carthage, Illinois, which is west of Macomb, about a year and a half. And those people are different up there, though. I was there as soon as I could get out of there. I did, you know. So then they transferred me to Carmi.
Oh, yeah.
And I was there for about a year. Then they transferred me to Marion, Illinois, and I was there 3 years with them. And then I resigned and did other things. In '73, I moved back to the farm then with my dad, 1973.
Were you married at the time you
Yes.
were transferred around all the place?
Yeah. We were married before my last year in college. Married in 1962. And
Yeah, that was a good year.
mhm.
That's when we got married.
Been married quite a while now, haven't we?
Same one.
So
Can I go back just a wee bit? When you were in the one-room school, or maybe even in Clarksville, I know you didn't have buses then. How did you get?
we did after my first grade. We had buses.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about before that? You walked to school, I
I walked, or they took me. You know, I was about about a mile and a quarter. You know, and I never walked too many times. They let me ride a lot. You know, I did. A lot of people had to walk, but
I know.
I walked some, but in the
You
bad
didn't-
weather with it.
You didn't have a cafeteria in that school either.
Oh, no.
What about
No,
lunches?
we took our lunchbox. We took our lunchbox all through the first 6 grades. Yeah,
What Mom fixed up then?
yeah. It was a funny thing. Emma Fox had a store in Clarksville.
Mm-hmm.
And we could go in there and he'd slice us off one slice of minced ham. And we might take a couple slices of bread in there and maybe some things to go along with a sandwich. And we'd buy a banana and maybe a nickel bag of potato chips and have our lunch that way.
That sounds like a pretty good meal. Though.
It was. In Clarksville, we were just around the block from the store, you know, and we walked over there. And we did that a few times, or did several times.
Well, I didn't mean to digress, but I just thought those things were so important
Yeah.
about those early days in school, and I didn't mean to go back from your college days.
No, that's fine. In our grade school, my grandfather, my mom's dad, taught one-room schools for 33 years, Glen Clapp. And he had taught at East Liberty, several, because it was just up the road from where he lived. But he also had taught in several other schools around, you know. But they had a coal house, or maybe cob. They put cobs in there too to start fires with, and
Sure.
and they would. The teacher had to do that and clean the school and do the whole thing, you know, and clean the blackboards and well, lots of times us kids though, the teacher would get us to wipe them all, you know, with a eraser, clean them off, you know, at the end of the day. But it was different than it is now.
Night and day.
Night and day. So. At grade school, you know, no lunches, and we did the first year no buses, and then got in junior high, then we had the buses, and we had long bus routes, you know, well, they
Oh,
still
yeah.
do, you know, but it seemed like you'd get up early to ride the bus for an hour before you got to school. And then, of course, in high school, we was in football and different things, or I was. It adds to your education and your your physical ability too to do that.
Is there a particular thing you remember about high school that was, oh boy, that was a great thing, and then on the other end, some things that you didn't care much for?
I don't know. There's a lot of things about high school I've forgotten. I know the first 2 years I took what they call industrial arts, you know, in shop and things, and then the last 2 years I had ag, and of course both classes I had shop things. In ag I had shop. I know I built a hog house when I was in ag shop. I built a grain auger wagon for feed when I was in the ag shop. And in the industrial arts shop, I know I built a cedar chest and different things, which is all, I still have the cedar chest. The feed wagon is rusted out. But I know at that time was also my dad and my uncle had a baler, and I spent a lot of time behind the baler or in the barn or something with baled hay, and I was always wanting to go with him. Lots of times though, he would have me and my grandfather Lycan cultivating beans or corn all summer long on a 2-row cultivator, 2 B John Deeres, and my grandfather would go along and take 2 rows and leave 2 rows, and I'd come along and get those, and we'd go back across the field.
Took a little time too.
It took a lot of time too. Of course, we didn't have 1,000 acres, you know, like they do now, or 2,000 to do, but he had a little old B John Deere that he bought new in 1939, and of course my dad had a B John Deere at the time. It was newer, in the 40s. But we would cultivate all day long. If I wanted to go bale hay, even though it was harder, I'd be with some other people, you know. Had fun. Fun and work. Anyway.
Well, should we jump to Marshall, and you finished your education and came back here to
Well,
farm?
We came back in '73, and we moved into my grandfather Clapp's house, which was old at the time. We lived in that until '78, and then we built a new home in '78 that we still have. We rented more land after I got back and bought bigger, more equipment than, you know, Dad had. And Dad had, once in a while, he had some part-time help helping him do things, but he never had any hired hand, permanent type of hired hand. So we got along pretty good, and we still, once in a while in the heavy harvest, we'd have some of our pastor helped us some, you know, R.L. Norris helped us some, and got by good that way.
In your farming at that time, what were your crops?
Soybeans and corn and wheat.
And wheat?
We never had any, I shouldn't say we never had any. I had some cattle.
That's what I was wondering about livestock.
I had a few that run on some rough land that I had, but we never really had a lot of ground that we had for hay. You know, we had enough hay and pasture to do what I had, but we never had a lot of livestock. We never had any hogs, just cattle. But and then in, I think 1979, we quit raising wheat because we had a bad year, and it was a smut, and it smelled like, the wheat smelled bad.
Very rotten.
It was bad. And so we never raised any wheat after that. And I go by now and see where the new church is at Clarksville and where the new part of the cemetery is. We'd farmed that one time.
Wow.
Back man. That makes you think, well, time's gone.
Yeah, it gets longer.
So, we farmed Emma Fox's place, or part of it, and Dick Perry had farmed part of it. And then Morgan's farmed that other part for a while, and then it changed hands and so forth. Well, now, I think, well, some of the Fox heirs plus Forsyth owns part of it. So
It's typical.
some of the family life, I don't know. Lots of times I remember as a young child coming to town on Saturday night, and my dad would go into the Cole's pool room, which you couldn't see from one end to the other because of the smoke in there. And he would, I don't know, he would, I think at the time he smoked some, and so you go in there and buy some cigarettes or something. And I'd go in there with him, and once in a while he'd find somebody to talk to that he knew, you know, talk about farming or something. And of course we'd go to church on Sunday and Sunday night and Wednesday night. We had a pastor that lived there in Clarksville, and of course most of them worked someplace else, you know, by vocational pastor. Some didn't, but the ones, lots of times people would take food and meat and things, you know, donate to the pastor as a way of, well, they had little money, but they had produce, you know, and things to give them. And it was a good life, but we just didn't do a lot of things. Now, we did take a few trips, because Dad was just a country boy. He did go 1 year to college at Eastern, and I think he had some disease, mumps or measles or something, when it came time to go the second year, and he didn't go. Of course, he graduated high school when he's 16.
Oh,
He took 2 years at once, but they did that at that time, and he was only 16 when he got out of high school.
that's pretty good too.
Yeah, and then he was almost 17, but he went 1 year to Eastern, and then he had a sister, older sister, that had gone to U of I, and she was a teacher up there, and she had met a fella from New York, and they got married, and she moved to New York, and he was working. He started out sweeping the floors when he was a kid in this optical company. He ended up in the 50s by owning the company, and
Wow.
they did a lot of work, and it's still a company. And we would go to New York once in a while, you know, and see her, you know, and a younger sister also went back out and lived in New York for the rest of her life too. You know,
Now, there's New York and New York City.
New York State,
They were in New York.
Horseheads, New York, which
Okay.
is right near Elmira,
Yeah,
right near Corning Glass.
been there.
And I still have cousins there, several. We would do that once in a while, and once in a while, you know, we'd go to the state fair too, and sometimes we'd camp out there, stay overnight. And so I remember once my uncle and we drove, and we put the cars together and put a tarp over it, and we stayed in the cars overnight, you know.
Could you do that today?
Oh, we could probably. If we I'd want a camper with a lock on it, probably.
Yeah, that's the safety factor today
Yeah.
is totally different, isn't it?
So, but we had, you know, I remember going to the state fair 2 or 3 times, you know, when I was a kid.
Going back to the machinery thing and how much it's changed. What size, well, let's just say, what was the yield of your corn back when your uncle and dad and all were farming versus today?
I remember talking about 80 bushel was really a
Oh, that was
top
a big,
yield.
big-
Yeah, yeah. And even my last year of farming, it was 2001, and things have changed so much since
So
then. You know, that's 23 years, you know, but I had some 150 once in a while, 180 bushel, but that was really great then. But now, if they don't get over 200, they're crying, you know. And it's just so much different. But the biggest tractor we had, we did have a 4-wheel drive tractor, which was, well, we had a 4-wheel drive and then a front wheel assist. The 4-wheel drive was like 200 and some horsepower, but now they've got 600 and some, you know.
and it keeps,
Keeps getting bigger and bigger. When I moved back to the farm, we got an 8-row planter. He had 4 rows up till then, 4-row planter and 4-row cultivator, and then we got an 8-row planter and 8-row cultivator. And that's as big as we ever got, because we never farmed over like 800 acres, you know, at that time. That we just weren't that big, but we made a living on it, you know.
sure.
And
That 80 bushel corn that you were talking about, do you recall what the price per bushel would be probably?
back in the 60s, I don't recall, but I do know that in the 80s, it got down to $1.50 or so, you know, and the programs they had, the PIC program and all those things, you got certificates that there's a mess, but we lived through it, and I do know that in 1995, corn got up to $5 a bushel.
Oh, I didn't recall that.
It did, just for a short time, and it was at the end of the marketing season, and about everybody was out of corn when it hit, and I still had some, and I remember I sold one semi-load for $5,000. That was in '95, and I bought a new pickup.
Splurged, too.
Yeah, that's some new stuff.
What, do you recall what the price per gallon of gas was at that time?
Oh, not exactly, really.
It was a long period, it was 25 cents a gallon.
I remember 25 cents a gallon back before I come back to the farm. I don't recall. I think in 62 or so, I think it was 63. I seen some of that.
That
Yeah.
was about the price.
Yeah. So
So you're farming today and back a few years ago, what you're seeing is quite different.
it's different.
Would you care to go back?
No.
Okay.
No. And I wouldn't want to farm anymore right now either.
Well, that's good.
It takes a lot of study and a lot of work and a lot of willpower to make it go now.
And you got to use some
Because
thought to it.
yes, and you can't try to hire somebody to work this machinery. You can't. You got to do it yourself or your partners or whatever. You can't hire someone to.
If you hire too many people, then you got to cash flow.
You have too many
Good.
problems, and you have So it's still a stressful, very stressful, and the markets can add to it. Like the grain right now is not good.
Evan, do you recall back a few years ago, it was in the political environment again. I think it was the mayor of New York, I think it was de Blasio, was running for president. And I heard an interview with him about all these things in the economy and farming. And he said, oh, that farming is just a simple thing. You just poke a hole in the ground, put a seed in it, and you got your crop.
Sounds pretty
I
simple.
thought, just how stupid could it? Of course, it was New York City, he was the mayor.
Yeah. They don't understand. And of course, we don't understand what they do either, I guess.
Right.
There's each person's got his own domain, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
And talking about here, family life, of course, I got into that going to church, and we did our own cooking, and we very seldom eat out, at that time. Very seldom in the 50s, because I was gone away from home in the late 50s. And I remember quite a bit of the 40s and 50s.
But there really were not a lot of choices of where to eat out, even if you did want to. There were some very good ones too.
And the food preparation on the farm there, we raised most of it, And the pastime and leisures, my dad was quite a reader, and I remember him reading before we got electricity. We didn't have electricity until I was 8 years old, and didn't have TV until I was 13 years old. And he read a lot. He had an Aladdin lamp that he'd sit next to the table where it was and read. And we had the battery radio too, that we'd listen to. And there's a lot of activities.
You didn't have a cell phone to put up to your ear either.
No, we didn't. I remember many times we would go to church on Wednesday night, the prayer meeting, and Emma Fox still had his store open after that at night. And we'd stop there, and he had a radio. He was listening to prize fights, and I'd get in there kind of with him and listen to his prize fights. And of course, we rented part of his farm too, Emma Fox. Did you know him?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
vaguely, not real well, but I know who he was.
And we'd do that. I remember doing that. Going on down the list here, when and where were we married? We were married in Clarksville, 1962. And did we live away? Yeah, we lived away after that. Oh, we never come back to Marshall until 1973. And
did you find a lot of things that changed all the time you were gone, or not?
What seems so weird is there was people born, or people was just very young when I left to go to school. When we come back, there was people I didn't know, and I still, don't know a lot of them. We just lost track of 14 years there. You lose track of people.
And a lot of generations can mature and go on in that period of time too.
Yeah. And so, as we were all over the state pretty well, we weren't northern, but from Carthage south all over Illinois.
Did you find in any of those places a town, or maybe not where you even were, but in the area, might be a good place to live, maybe better than Marshall?
No, not really. There were some places we liked, but I wouldn't trade it for Marshall.
Well, I was wondering something. Well, we were in Chicago for 15 years too, or 13.
Yeah.
And we always said someday we want to move back. And it's interesting to find people that have been away for a while and come back.
There's things that we liked about some of the things the different places we've been. When we were in Murfreesboro and Marion, we were close to my wife's brother that lives in Carbondale, or Murfreesboro rather. We had some family, you know, and also had a brother-in-law that lived in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. So
It's way down.
yeah, which was just less than an hour from Murfreesboro, you know. So we'd go down there some. All the jobs I ever had was what jobs or careers. I worked for the Soil Conservation Service, and then I worked for FS one summer in Murfreesboro, and then I was with Country Companies Insurance for a couple of years in Murfreesboro, and then after moving back to Marshall, I was with Richard Eubank for a few years.
Now, he was a relative too.
Brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law? Okay.
Yeah, my wife's brother.
Okay.
And so, another one of my wife's brothers was Daryl. He was an insurance agent in Murfreesboro for a lot of years.
I remember Daryl from school.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, I remember Richard also.
yeah. Daryl was my age also.
Yeah.
What historical events local stand out in your mind? I remember, not from Marshall, but I remember, you know, landing on the moon as a historical event, you know, that, and one of the things that seemed impossible to me at the time that stood out. Local events, of course, we didn't get to a lot of them in my time. I know people lived here in town did more than what we did, and but we always liked the county fair, you know, and we enjoyed that, and we would, as I said before, we would take a few trips to New York, or also had an aunt in Marion, Illinois when I was small, that we'd go down there and visit them a lot. And
is that considered a pretty big adventure then, to go down there?
yeah, yeah. Of course, no interstates in. I mean, it took 4 hours to drive down there, or whatever it was.
So,
And I remember in 1947, we went to New York one of the times. Dad had a 41 Ford, and the shocks were bad on it, and we bounced, floated all the way to New York and back. And we got to see Niagara Falls.
oh yeah.
And
Did you have to replace a tire on that trip?
I don't think so.
I mean, tires were usually
Yeah.
a sensitive,
Yeah,
terrible thing to have. But
We
you
had
to
fuel
replace
pump problems, I think we did, on that old Ford. We also spent one night in Canada on the way. We go through, and we stayed along a farmhouse alongside the road. They rented out a room, you know,
Oh, really? Okay.
and they were French people. They were really, they could speak English, but it was broken. And I remember that. And that is something that
That was quite an experience then.
it was. And we would,
Do you know what their background was? I mean, did they farm, did they teach, own a business, or what their background
those
was?
people, they were farmers, I think. I think I remember hearing them say, "I go feed the cows" or something like that. You know, and they were along the side of the highway, but
Even at that time, there were a lot of rooms for rent along the highways because we didn't have
homes.
motels.
Yeah,
And they'd rent a room. I know there were a couple places here in Marshall.
no one.
Elmer Renner did.
None of the cities had none of the little towns had
Hotels.
hotels. What modern conveniences affected my life? I don't know. Microwave is one of them, I think. But, you know, just having even a gas or electric cook stove or automatic furnaces or things that you don't have to cut wood, carry coal, or have the messy things in your home like, you know, you used to have. And the cars nowadays, they'll talk to you, you know, and they'll do things that they'll guide you down the road.
Everything but wash the dishes. Right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the heating and all, and I can remember as a youngster, my dad bought chunk coal.
Yeah.
And that was one of my jobs, was to use a hammer to break it up in small enough pieces that they can
Bring it in. They used to have a lot of coal, I think, around Terre Haute.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember
They was
that.
mining it.
That tipple out there by West Terre Haute, I remember seeing that. And things have changed.
Well, you know, the controversy right now has been, at least in some public circles, the fossil fuels, getting away from those, converting everything to electric. Does that make sense to you?
I don't know. I think we need some of both. You know, I think we need a combination of things to you know, like so many other things. I think we don't want to depend on one thing entirely.
Agree.
Takes everything.
You haven't bought a Tesla car then? Huh?
I'm sorry.
You haven't bought a Tesla car?
No.
That's an electric one.
You know, I think if a person commuted, you know, a few miles, you know, maybe 30, 40 miles a day, every day, an electric car would be good, you know.
You wouldn't care to start out to New York in one, would you?
No.
That would be.
Take a generator with me.
You might need more than that. Oh, goodness, yeah.
But I don't know what all I missed on here, but
Oh, they say there's nothing sacred about
yeah,
it.
but talking about chores as a childhood, I know there's a lot of other kids that had a lot more chores than I did when I was young. I don't know, I had some things to do, but I wasn't labored down a lot like a lot of people have, I know, you know. So, we had a good living. We did good, you know, when I was a kid, and but my dad had been through the Depression, and he was real conservative, real, and too much. And I think I should have been a little more aggressive, like when it came to buying land and things like that. I can see I missed some opportunities, you know.
We can't all look back, though,
No,
can we?
we can't go
Or
back.
do anything about it.
We can't go back. But I can't complain. I can't complain.
And again, an electric car, a truck, just doesn't make sense. And even was proposed to go with tanks and the battlefield electric.
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
I don't get it. I don't get it.
Doesn't make sense. You mentioned the Aladdin lamp. Was it your job to clean the shades when they got?
I have, yes. Yeah. They could be messy too.
Oh gosh, yes.
You know, kerosene lamps. If you get it this wrong, it really messed it up in a hurry. I remember we had a barrel, I don't know, probably a 30-gallon barrel, back behind the old wood house for kerosene, you know. We bought a barrel of it. So we'd have, my mom and dad also had a kerosene cook stove that they used sometimes. I don't know, maybe maybe when canning season or something, or I don't know when they use them. I know they had it, you know. And it was 2 or 3 burners, and they would,
That's fancy.
yeah, have kerosene cook burners.
How about a washing machine? Did you have a gas-powered washing machine?
No, I don't think we ever did, in my memory. But we had one of these where you go back and forth,
Oh, yeah.
and you turn the wringer, and it had little gears on there. And I was just little, and I stuck my finger in there.
Ouch.
Oh.
You didn't do
I
that
didn't do that
did you?
again. Oh, that hurt. And I remember my mom washing one time in that old house, and the kitchen floor swagged in the middle, and she turned a chair up on its front and put a tub on that, and she was washing, and I tipped that chair over and spilled all that tub of water on the kitchen floor. And she says, "That sure does make me mad," and I mocked her, and that wasn't the thing to do.
And a tub of water's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water. I don't think it all went, but a lot of it went, you know. But that's what she used, you know.
Well, how about when you got electricity? How did that change things?
It changed things a lot. We had a deep freeze, and we had an electric washing machine. It was a ringer type, but it was electric, and we had, of course, we didn't have a dryer, but we had a big clothesline, and there was a few lines in the basement. When we got electricity, we had a new house too, so that was coming together, you know. So she had some lines in the basement that she could hang things up on, you know, real cold weather when she drive in the basement.
Did the coming of television excite you and change your life at all?
It did some, but 1959, when I started to school, I had never really got in the habit of watching TV before I went to school. And we never had any TV in school, and even after we got married, we didn't have much of a TV for a long time after we got married. But we eventually did, you know. By 69, I think I got my first color TV set.
Boy,
Yeah,
big change.
it was. And
You mentioned the telephone too. Did you have the
we had
party line probably?
we had party line. We had the old ringer phones on the wall, but then a little before we got the dial, we had a still ringer on the wall, but it had a handset like a modern. It had a cradle and it's still on the old ringer on the party line, you know. But then in 1960, no company wanted to come to Clarksville to pick up the people there, so they formed a group and
I was wondering when that was.
got our own system. And of course, I was in college at the time, and I remember being able to dial home and get a hold of them.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember as a youngster, the Clark switchboard on the corner, it's called Switchboard Road now.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's a big cable, like a whole bunch of wires going in the house. I think they had just a plug-in type switchboard.
Yeah, yeah.
Was that the start of the telephone company there?
No, well, see, Clarksville had one too, a switchboard, and that was Clark Switch. That was our people over in that area.
Yeah.
And there's one at Clarksville
Okay.
where we were.
I thought it was part of the same.
Eventually, I don't remember how far the new system went east. It did. I think Clarksville new system picked up like where Gene Burns lives and some of that area on over close to that Clark Switchboard Road. I'm not positive where. But, of course, when we got that dial system, they originally had it where you could only talk 6 minutes, then they'd shut you off.
Full plug.
And that was still the way it was when we moved back home in '73. But eventually they got so we're not that way now.
Modernized.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that I've always kind of admired was the country store. You mentioned Fox's store. Could you kind of describe what that store looked like? I remember being in there a couple times.
Have you been to Moonshine? Well,
Not the same.
it was sort of like that. The Emma Fox's store, you walked in and the east wall was all shelves and mostly canned goods. And then back, out from that, he had a counter. And the counter was full of things like potato chips and different things. And then he had a place there where he could cut meat and cheese and things and wrap it. He had a big roll of paper that he could wrap it. And back behind, a little farther back, was a kerosene refrigerator, a big one, and I don't know if he had a freezer on it. I don't recall. But going on back, well, he had a little room off of that where he had kerosene. You could buy kerosene. There was a smelly kerosene room, etc. On back farther, there was shelves and things, and there'd be bib overhauls, and there'd be shoes. And in the back, there's a barrel of cider or vinegar, apple cider vinegar. And he'd pump you out a gallon or a jug full. On back in another room, there was roll fencing, there was scoop shovels, there was water pumps to pump with your hand, bolts. And on back the other way, there was clothing, there was shelves, and there was anything you needed on the farm or to wear, he had.
So it was really a general store.
It was a
as
general
opposed to
store.
groceries.
He would come out and if you had chickens, he would cull them for you and take the ones that weren't laying and sell them for you. And
You could buy fried chicken the next week, huh?
then he had a ton Ford truck with a top that was covered with tarps, and every Friday he'd go to Terre Haute, Holman, and get his wholesale groceries and bring back for the store. And
You mentioned the name to Clapp. Now that was your family. Was Charlie Clapp part of your family?
yeah, Charlie was been my grandmother Lycan's first cousin. I mean,
Okay.
their dads were brothers. I mean, Charlie Clapp's dad and my grandmother's dad were brothers.
Okay. Well, I remember Charlie Clapp. 'Cause I remember him at the hardware store.
Yeah,
And then he belonged to the Marshall Rotary Club.
yeah,
Which I do too now. And he was still living when I joined the club in '76.
uh-huh.
And he loved to sing. He just loved to sing.
Yeah. I guess he had run a huckster wagon at one time. I
He
didn't.
did.
That was before my time.
He told us about that one time at a Rotary meeting.
And then Everett Clapp, that worked at the Kirshner's, was the brother of his.
I forgot about that.
And Harold was his son. And Harold lived in Marshall for a long time, worked for the post office, and then he moved out to his wife's farm on the Conlog Road. He had a dairy farmer for a while. He was my dad's age, and they were good friends. Of course, they were distant cousins anyway. But he passed away of cancer in the 80s, I think. He had cancer, but
So is there anyone with the name Clapp living around in this area at all?
with the name Clapp,
Yeah, I'm not aware of any, but I thought you might be.
well, there's some in Casey and Westfield.
Oh, really?
Part of the Claps in let me get started. Part of the claps in Westfield are closely related, and others are very, very distant related. Like the ones, Earl Clapp and Larry Clapp that run the elevator in Ashmore, they were related, but it's a lot farther distant. But about all the Claps, I think, are related somehow, but
That's
some of
usually
them
the
more
case.
distant than others. Yeah.
Now, Janet Haston was a Clapp, wasn't she? Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I thought.
Her dad, Wayne D., was a first cousin to my mom.
I thought there must be a family tie there somewhere.
And then Wayne D.'s wife was my wife's sister.
And Marshall and Countryside, so many relations.
Yeah.
And many people are not aware of that, especially if you're a newcomer.
I'm in the genealogy pretty heavy anymore.
Oh, good.
And Emma Fox, I didn't know, but I just here in the last year I found out that he's a Clapp descendant, and I didn't know that. There were three Claps that we knew of that come to Illinois from Indiana, you know, way back. But his mother came over, and she was a sister to the three brothers that had come over and that I never knew about, you know.
That's the thing with genealogy. You start looking under all the rocks, and it's amazing what comes out as far
Yeah.
as finding people.
Yeah, it's amazing. And
I'll ask you one other question that kind of interested me was, you were talking about your mother, and you had everything pretty much that you needed from the farm and the groceries and obviously a garden. Did she can a lot of goods?
she did. She canned a lot. And she was pretty particular. If she didn't have it used up the next year's canning time, she'd dump it and can new.
Oh, I'm surprised at that.
Yeah, she went by the dates for them expiration dates.
Used by.
Yeah, she
you find on
did
the
keep stuff, you know.
Oh, interesting.
She knew if they had green beans left, she would usually dump them. And
That's funny. How about things like, I mean, she probably made butter.
I don't remember making butter. I don't. But I do remember her buying oleo
Oh, yeah.
and in the plastic things, and you had to burst the little red bubble in there and mix it up. I remember that.
Do you remember the oleo it was pure white?
Yeah.
And then there's a little packet in there that you could rub over it to give it some color. Okay. I guess when you look at your family tree and your mother, did she do a lot of home sewing too? And
Yes.
clothes, drapes?
Quilting. She did a lot of quilting.
Oh, really?
My grandmother did. And in fact, lots of times in the wintertime, Mom would have a quilting frame up in the dining room. And as a kid, I'd lay under there and I'd listen to the radio, listen to, I think, the Green Hornet
Oh, yeah.
and Lone Ranger and Roy Rogers some.
During the day, my grandma listened to Stella Dallas and something else just regularly, like every day. It was like a Today's Cereal, but
Just like like TV, except that no picture.
no picture. But it's almost like she was so intent with it. It's almost like some of the family.
Yes, yeah. So
Well, Evan, it's been a delight talking to you.
it's been fun.
And I'm going to ask you one last question. If you travel, let's say, to New York today, and someone said, "Marshall, where is that? And is that a good place to visit?" What would you tell them?
I'd tell them where it is on I-70 on the east next to Indiana. But I'd tell them it's a good place to live. It's a good climate. It's good people. And it's just a wonderful place to be. And
I would agree.
I have toured a lot of places. We've done quite a bit of traveling, and my son lived in New Jersey for a while, and New York for a while, and California for a while, and we visited all those places. They were really nice to visit, but I wouldn't want to live there
Right back
or back here.
here.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking your time out
I
to
appreciate it.
visit with us. And I think you find out now you have a lot more history than what you thought.
Yeah, yeah.
And the
Makes-
thing with genealogy.
Makes me think, but it's, there's a lot of experiences I've had. Some I've forgotten, but a lot of them I still remember a little
Good,
bit.
that's what we're trying to find out from people that have been around a while. Well, I remember when we came back to Marshall, it was 1975.
Yeah.
And in 1976, I don't remember who it was, got us kind of interested in history and all, and we joined the Historical Society. And a guy named Lawrence Lycan was the president of it that
Yeah.
time, and the secretary, I believe, was Audrey.
Might have been, I don't recall. I know they were in it, but I don't know what.
I think both of them were in it at that
Yeah.
time, and I don't know. I just felt they were really sincere about it,
Yeah.
and it was a nice club to join because of them.
Yeah. Well, they enjoyed that and did a lot of. My dad in later years, he had one sister that, the one that lived in Marion, Illinois in the 50s, had moved back to Marshall and married a fellow from Icemore. And they had a lot of fun together then after that until the age caught up with my aunt. She and my uncle, they
It do catch up with us.
did catch up and they got bad health and passed away. They had a lot of fun with them.